Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the TRS-80 Model II again. It was in the last video that I got this thing actually booting. Let me put the disk in the correct orientation. But I couldn't do much more with it because I didn't have a keyboard that worked, so I couldn't type any commands on it. It booted to the OS, but we want to see if this thing can do more. So on today's video, I'm going to try to refurbish the very dirty and beat up old keyboard, and then we'll see if it actually works. So without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, I can't do anything on the TRS-80 Model II until the keyboard is working. And oh, is this keyboard in rough shape. I notice it's very wobbly. And okay, that's simply because it's missing one of the rubber feet. Not that big of a problem. But what is a little bit of a problem is there's a giant hole right here. Now inside there is the actual keyboard connector, and I'm noticing the keyboard's actually broken here. Looks like that's a DIN connector in there, and someone yanked on the cable really hard and it snapped the plastic. I think the first step I need to do is just to take this thing apart as much as I can and see what's missing or what's broken. There certainly aren't a lot of screws in it. There's one there. There is one here. That one's missing, and there is one over here. Okay, there you go. Wow. All right, on the inside, besides it being filthy, we're missing one of the posts, which I think I have. I think it's in my little parts bin for the Model II. Okay, there's the keyboard. It looks like it's intact, all right.
The top cover is essential for holding the keyboard down. These little parts here interlock with those posts on the bottom, which have all broken.
Obviously, that would be through this metal plate right here, which is very rusty, and yes, spider balls and things are in here, of course. I'm going to take the top and bottom cover and I'm going to stick this in the sink and let this soak in some water. All right, I have my little boxes of parts and screws and stuff from the Model II. So I'm going to throw the keyboard, well, the 3 screws that were in the keyboard. And I have this bag here, which has also some parts from the machine, terminator, knobs, other stuff like that. But I notice here, there's actually that little standoff that broke, so I can at least try to glue that on, although it's missing the top little peg as well. So this whole keyboard has suffered some serious trauma. All right, let's take a look here. So that's the DIN connector, which does seem to be fully attached, so that's good, I guess. If we flip this over, well, the condition is dirty, but this is actually in pretty nice shape. Keytronic keyboard, the keys are yellowed, they are filthy, but the PCB is not damaged, and I don't see a ton of rust. So there are metal springs under here, which is very typical for all Keytronic keyboards, and they can rust really badly and fall apart. All the springs look to be in okay shape. So really, next step is I need to take this apart, fully clean it, and it's gonna need new foam and foil pads. So I have 2 containers here. One is warm soapy water. This will be for the keycaps, and this one, which doesn't have any water in it, is for the springs that will be underneath this keyboard. So I got the keycap puller, and I just need to start pulling off the caps. There's the spring, so I'll put that in there, and the keycap itself goes into the warm soapy water.
Unfortunately, there's just no quick way to get a keyboard restored or even cleaned up, especially a Keytronic one like this. You just have to take your time and be methodical about it. It's very easy to lose springs and keys when taking them apart, so just pay extra careful attention as you remove each keycap that none of the springs ping off into the distance, which of course is going to be a problem down the road. Before I remove the spacebar, it's just a matter of removing all the screws from the PCB on the back to reveal what's underneath. Here's the contact side of the Keytronic keyboard. Those are the capacitive touch pads there. There's a little bit of corrosion on this board, but we'll take a look at that later to see if that's going to be a problem. Under the PCB, we're left with the very degraded foam and foil pads. The part of the pad that you're looking at should be a shiny metallic color, and the fact it's not is why this keyboard almost certainly wouldn't work when you push the keys. Spacebar stabilizers can be fragile, so I remove those at the end just to make sure I don't break them. It also has a unique spring, so make sure you don't lose that. There are also two little plastic pieces that connect the spacebar to the stabilizer. I'm going to be using my bent O-ring pick to remove all these foam pads. This process can be a little bit tedious, but it's also kind of fun. Each foam pad has a little plastic disc that's against the white part of the key switch. You just have to get the pick underneath that and you flick them out. I would recommend some eye protection during this part because they have a tendency to fly all over the place, including directly into your face. What kind of TRS-80 Model II video would this be without at least one dead spider? With all the pads removed, this part of the keyboard is ready for a good scrubbing in the sink to get it as clean as possible. Next up, I have to give attention to this PCB. 99% IPA is going to help me clean off all the gunk that's actually on it. The traces and pads are pretty fragile, so just make sure you rub very gently. The paper towel is looking pretty grimy, so clearly this is relatively effective. Some of the pads and traces are pretty corroded from where water probably seeped through the top of the keyboard down to the PCB. So I'm using my multimeter on the continuity mode just to double check that none of these really nasty looking traces are damaged. After poking around the board quite a bit, I couldn't find any spots where there were broken traces. I decided to try out one of these fiberglass brushes to see if that would help remove some of the corrosion a little bit, but it actually didn't, and I didn't want to rub too hard in case I erased one of the traces. Successfully repairing one of these foam and foil keyboards is all about just keeping the PCB nice and clean. You don't want any foreign debris on the PCB that might interfere with the way that those foam pads touch these contacts. Keyboard baseplate and sliders are back from being washed and dried. It's rusty on the bottom here, but the thing overall is looking a million times better, especially on the top. Fortunately, cleaning off the dirt revealed that there is some corrosion on the top of the baseplate as well, but I'm not going to address any of that right now. You can take each of these slider assemblies out pretty easily. They just push out of the base plate. So if you do want to restore the base plate, it's not too difficult. And they also push right back in without any issue. So now it's time for the foam and foil pad replacement. I got mine from Texelec.com. As far as I'm aware, it's the only game in town, at least here in the US, and they're reasonably priced. And Kevin and his wife make these at home with some pretty cool equipment. I've used these several times on previous keyboard repairs and I've never had any issues with them. Installation can be a little fiddly. Each slider has 4 little tabs that the plastic disc on the foam and foil pad needs to slide into. What I do is I wedge it under 2 of them, and then I use my O-ring pick to push that plastic disc under the other 2 tabs. I want to hear it click for each one of those just to make sure that it's in. I'll give it a little bit of a tug once it's in, just to make sure that it's firmly in there, because occasionally you think it's in there and you give it a little tug, and one of the clips wasn't holding on and it comes right back out again. As you do more of these, you kind of get the hang of the process and it gets easier and quicker to put them in, but it's still a tedious process to make sure you're doing it correctly on all of them. Here's one of the sliders with a properly installed foam and foil pad. Notice how that plastic disc is under the clips on all 4 sides. Once all the pads are installed, I like to just go through and sort of feel and tug on each one just to make sure they're all in. I actually found 3 or 4 that weren't quite in properly, so I had to reinstall those. Next up, I want to reinstall the PCB, but I have to make sure I reinstall the spacebar before I do that, because of course those little stabilizer bars need to be connected under the PCB first. And don't forget, usually the spacebar has a stronger spring, so you have to reinstall the appropriate one. The screws that hold the PCB down screw into the black plastic part of the slider, so if you have a slider where the little screw hole has cracked or doesn't hold anymore, you can just move that slider between 2 different spots on the keyboard so you can get one under the screw hole that's not broken. The dirty keys have turned the soapy water a really gross brown color after soaking for a while. What I'm doing now is I'm taking each key out, I'm using some magic eraser just to wipe off any dirt or scuff marks on each of the keys. Just look at the color of that water, it's like a disgusting brown retro soup. I'm back with some fresh clean water to rinse off the keys and get that soap off of them. We're almost in the home stretch now. I've let the keys dry off and I'm going to use some 303 protectant on each one of them just to get the luster back. They're all looking a little dull. This whole process is definitely a little tedious, but it's going to be worth it in the end. And I just watch YouTube videos while I do this kind of work. After applying 303 to all the keys, I have to go and then buff each key to get the excessive 303 off of them. And here we are, finally, I'm reinstalling all the keys back onto the keyboard. And they look nice and shiny, so I think this is going to look good. I forgot to take a picture of the keyboard before I started, so luckily I was able to find a picture of the keyboard without too much issue on the internet. One thing I didn't realize is that the 2 keys that have LEDs on them, caps lock and the lock key, use a different and smaller spring. So luckily I didn't misplace those. I was able to get those keys working. Just look at how amazing the keys look now. I almost can't believe this is the same keyboard, but that's the magic of cleaning the keys and then using 303 on them. With the keys all reinstalled, it's time to turn my attention to the case. I want to look as good as possible, so 303 protectant, especially on this black part of the plastic, is going to make it look a million times better. It was all very dull and oxidized. 303 also seemed to help restore the Radio Shack logo a little bit. Definitely yellowed, but it really was dull looking, and with the 303 it's actually a little bit shiny now. I'm really dying to know how this is going to look all together, so there it is, the top cover on the keyboard, and wow, just wow. Since I washed all the sliders and then put those new foam pads on, it actually feels really nice to type on. It has a very satisfying feel and sound. All right, so let's talk about the keyboard shell here. Unfortunately, when I took this apart and started cleaning it, I found that it was in pretty rough shape. I mean, some of it we already knew about, like this giant hole here, but it was actually a lot worse than that. Originally, I had a loose standoff that had clearly had broken off the inside of this. Well, it turned out that that was this standoff right here. This standoff here was actually missing, and I went back and reviewed footage when I opened the keyboard. Both of those had already broken off. I only had one in my little parts bin here, or it was in the bag actually, and that one turned out to be this one here. Inside the keyboard, when I was cleaning, I found the little nub on the top as well. That was wedged inside the keyboard. Well, as you can see, it's reattached now. Now, I didn't really show how I reattached it because I'm really bad at that type of thing. But you notice it doesn't look like there's any epoxy or anything around here, and that's because this is ABS plastic.
So I used 100% acetone to plastic weld this stuff back together. From what I understand about acetone and ABS plastic, it completely melts it, and when you hold it together and then it dries, it's basically as strong as the original plastic. So this standoff here has been reattached, and I'm not going to stress test it, but it seems to be on there pretty firmly. But in addition to that, there was a large crack that went from this hole here all the way over to here, and there was also another one that went from there to there. Now, I don't think these large cracks are really showing up that much anymore, and that's because I used acetone again to weld these back together. The bad thing about that is, unfortunately, I put little drips of acetone in there and I held it together until it dried, is that it leaked out the other side, and the acetone had a really bad effect on the paint on the underside of this thing. So first off, there's a crack that went along here, and you'll notice that the paint is sort of marred up on here now, and that was the acetone, unfortunately. And then in addition, right here is also that other crack, and it's also a little bit marred up. Now, the truth of the matter is this whole cover is in horrible condition, so I'm actually not really that upset about this. The plastic is solid now, it's no longer cracked, and yeah, the paint surface is worse than it was, but I mean, look at this thing. Like, this is all scratches or whatever that were there, and so that is the danger of using acetone. Yes, it did fix the crack that was there, but unfortunately it's not very pretty looking. I was most concerned about making this solid again, and that seems to be what has happened. I also removed one of the feet. I think it was this one here, and I put these two little feet on there. These are the original ones. You notice that this is now marked up. That was the acetone and the plastic that had gotten onto the bench. This thing is okay. It is missing the standoff here, and unfortunately, these are what hold up the keyboard. The way the keyboard works on this is it goes over these, so it's now held up on 3 corners, and there are also these 2 in the middle. So it's held up, you know, in a couple different spots, but certainly not ideal. When we take the top cover, it has these things, which these pegs that are on here used to go inside of. Now they're broken on all 3 corners, but it's still enough of it there that when we put this down onto here, and you just gotta, oh, well, it's not gonna work with the wire sticking out like that. So if we put this down onto here now, there we go, it's actually in place, no screws, obviously. It's not bad. I mean, if you push down over here, yeah, the keyboard's bending a little bit, but it's held up these 3 corners and here. So the main part of the keyboard is actually fine to type on. This is not gonna be as strong as it was originally because of that missing standoff. What can I do? That standoff is just gone. Now on the top cover, obviously the paint's missing, so that is what it is. And I also did find that this piece right here was actually broken right there as well. I don't know if it's cameras focusing on that, but I also used acetone, but it's not as bad and ugly as what's on the bottom side, which is a good thing because this is the top where you are looking at it. And to be honest, when it's all together, the keyboard at this point looks a billion. I mean, billion with a B times better than it did. Now, of course, the big question is, does this keyboard work? And if it does it work properly because of all that corrosion that was on the PCB? Now, I know there's gonna be comments about this, but people are gonna be asking for a complete restoration of this keyboard. That's stripping the paint off, the silver paint that is, reapplying it all, and then underneath here, taking the paint off of this metal base plate here and dealing with all that rust that's on both the top and the bottom. And then maybe something like take some ramen or who knows what, right? And try to fill this in and recreate this missing hole and figure out a way to mount this again, you know, stuff like that. That is all way, way beyond my abilities. Not to mention it's extremely time consuming and I'm more into fixing hardware and digital logic problems and not so much in the aesthetics of things. This keyboard looks pretty damn good to me. Once it's screwed together, I think it's gonna be pretty great. And maybe all I really need to do is replace this DIN connector with a proper cable, for instance, or something. I don't know, come up with something to make that a little bit more durable than the way it is right now. But for now, I can certainly give this keyboard a test.
Now, before I power this thing up again to test the keyboard, A few viewers pointed out in my last video on the Model 2 that I had the cards installed in this chassis in the wrong order. I found that kind of surprising because initially I thought that all of these slots on the back here were all the same, so it didn't really matter what order you install these cards, but it actually does matter. In the Model 2 technical manual, specifically the area about the motherboard and the card cage, it does say that you need to have the CPU, floppy drive controller, memory, and video in this order. And I did some more reading in the manual as to why that matters, and it turns out there's a couple signals on this backplane that actually pass through one slot to the next. And apparently that's to allow some cascading interrupts to work between the CPU board and the peripheral boards. If I install the CPU in this slot here and then I left a gap and then I put the other cards, there wouldn't be anything in this middle slot here to actually connect those two interrupt lines together because you need a card in there to do that. Now, as we saw in the last video, it worked as the cards are configured here, and this is the CPU card right here with the memory to its right. But even the video card and the disk controller cards are installed in the wrong order, where the video card should be last and the floppy drive controller should be the next one after the CPU card. Now, the rightmost card slot in here is a little bit damaged. It's spread apart more than it should be. And I think that comes from when this machine was dropped, it tweaked everything a little bit and it put a lot of pressure on that slot. But the rest of the slots are totally fine. And even though in here it says the CPU should be in the first slot, which is the rightmost slot, I don't think it actually matters. As long as the CPU is the rightmost card in the card cage and you don't have any gaps. And I'm pretty sure that's gonna work properly just by looking at the schematics and seeing the way these slots are wired up. It's definitely fascinating that this worked as is and it did boot into the operating system, but perhaps something like the keyboard wouldn't have worked properly if I had left it like this. So let me rearrange these cards into the correct order and then we'll test the keyboard. And there we go, cards are in the correct order in the chassis now. CPU, floppy drive, RAM, and the video/keyboard. I've also reinstalled the holder because the floppy drive cable sort of pulls on that card a little bit and I was afraid it might touch the RAM card. And since I've manipulated things on this machine, I'm going to turn it on before I plug the keyboard into it just to make sure that it's still booting normally. Here we go. Okay, I heard high voltage on the monitor, so that's a good sign. All right, insert diskette, it says. Let's put this in. Hopefully we get a booting OS. So far, so good. All right, the RAM check finished, initializing it says. There it is, TRS-80 Model II TRS-DOS 2.0 Alpha. Thumbs up. Let me grab the keyboard. Okay, here is that newly freshened keyboard. Oh, it just looks so nice. Now I can't just plug it into the computer because we know that there is a keyboard connector right here and there's no cable, right? And that's because here's the front panel, here is the keyboard cable. There's a connector that goes onto the PCB on the back, and then there's what plugs into the keyboard. And unfortunately, it is fixed into there. It looks like they thread this through, and then they either attach this end or they attach the DIN connector once it's through there. So it's kind of stuck. So I'm just gonna put this over here on some boxes, just balance it all, and plug everything in. This DIN connector here has seen better days. So I'm gonna hit it with some Deoxit inside there. Just double checking, nothing is shorting, everything looks good there. All right, I think everything is ready to go. It's the moment of truth. I cannot deny that I'm pretty nervous. Oh, I didn't mention the keyboard cable on the back of the computer. It's a keyed connector. One of the pins is blocked off, so you can't plug it in the wrong way, which is a really good thing. And I guess I'm ready to do it. The two lights here may flash when I turn the power on, or they may not. Here we go. They did, they blinked. Okay, doesn't mean the keyboard's working, just means there's power to it. All right, I have the focus fix on the monitor, so hopefully you can read that. I'm gonna try to type the date. 03, it's working, I can't even believe it. I'm just typing a random date here. 1987, enter. Time, 01:01:01. I can't even believe it. This is working. This is working. Oh, wow. So I think DIR, nope. Okay, there's help. Oh, DIR, it is DIR. A, colon? No. DIR 1? I mean, I don't know. DIR 0. Okay, there we go. So that's his disk drive 0. I mean, I can't even believe this thing is working. Oh, look at this. 268 granules in, 2 extents, TRS DOS. There's stuff on here. I mean, I don't know if these are programs or what these are. Docom, Basecom 64. I mean, are these things I could just run? No. I am completely clueless about TRS DOS right now. Okay, I typed the word basic. Oh, and it went into basic. 10, print, hello from Adrian's digital basement. This is actually Christmas Eve when I'm recording this, December 24, 2021. I still can't believe this is actually working. Go to 10, run. I mean, look at that, it's freaking working. Oh, this is so amazing. This is such a long time coming. Control C actually worked. There's a break key up here, that does it as well. That's just the same thing as Control C. Okay, well, I'm gonna go through and just push all these keys and see if they type. So every key appears to be working. The only thing I can't get working in BASIC here is the left, right, up, and down keys, which makes me think that there's some function I need to do to use these, because I don't think all 4 would stop working, but every other key is actually working. Okay, I can't test the escape key either. That doesn't seem to do anything in BASIC, but hold stops the program from running. Oh, what's this repeat key? Oh, that causes it to repeat. And that works. I mean, this is a total success. This keyboard, wow. Yeah, foam and foil. You never know when you're gonna put this back together if you're gonna have some keys that don't work, maybe some of that corrosion, maybe there was a piece of dirt or dust in there, but I was being very careful to just keep it as clean as possible. And it freaking works. See if I can get out of here. Okay, system actually took me back to DOS. Okay, the arrow keys are working fine here. Up and down, don't do anything, they just put this plus and minus, but the left and right arrows work perfectly. So yeah, that's it. Like Left 4 Dead. And it's totally working, at least as far as I could tell. This is amazing. All right, well, I think that's gonna be it for this video here. What's left to do on the Model 2 is really just the cosmetics of the outside of the case. And I have some good ideas on how to clean that up a bit. And then I can finally fully reassemble this thing so I can get all the loose parts that are floating around my basement for months now back in around this machine so I can finally call it complete. And of course, at that point, I need to make some more discs, maybe hook up a GoTech so I can actually run some software on here and see what this thing's all about. So watch for that video in the near future. I hope you've been enjoying this series. I have been really enjoying it myself. If you do like it, then I'd appreciate a thumbs up. If not, you know what to do, all the usual stuff. Check out my second channel if you haven't already. There's lots of good videos over there all the time. I definitely appreciate a subscribe if you haven't already. To both channels, that is, of course. And huge thanks to my patrons. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen. The support they give me is absolutely amazing and it's so heartwarming. So I want to thank them all so much. And of course, if you want to become a patron, you can do so at the link in the description below. I guess that's going to be it. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.